Hey guys, how's it going?
Doing well.
Hey Bo, you made it. Awesome. Well, thank you for showing up. I wasn't sure if anyone was going to show up, so thank you for at least showing up. My name is PROJECT.make Core, and this is about Grunt. If you're anti-Grunt, looking at you. No, I'm joking. That's all right. If you have questions about Gulp, and if you've heard about Gulp, we have a resident expert in the front row, so we can talk about that at another point in time. But this one's about Grunt. If you want to actually follow the presentation, it is online. That's the link. I'm actually using the online version right now, so if you want to follow along, you can do that. It's on GitHub, and that's how you get there. All right. So assumptions about what we're going to be talking about today. So I assume you want to learn something new. Yay for learning something new. All right. I assume you want to see some code, a little bit of code. I'll do that as well. And then I assume that some of you have seen or written something in JavaScript. Has anyone not written something in JavaScript? Don't be afraid. That's okay. Jimmy, I know you've written something in JavaScript. He's trying to throw me off. Okay, that's great. Who in here has never heard of Grunt or used Grunt before? Okay, great. Welcome. Awesome. Okay, cool. And then the last assumption is that I assume you want to do best practices. So there's some best practices that we want to try to follow. Some will disagree that some of the things I'm going to show you may not be best practices for Grunt or JavaScript. I'm specifically talking about best practices in Drupal and development in general. So we can have that friendly, nerdy debate at another point in time. All right, so like I said, my name is PROJECT.make Core. I'm currently the VP of Engineering at Better Weekdays. Better Weekdays is actually a new startup that I'm partnering with some other guys. I left my job a couple months ago. I'm kind of out there just floating, and I'm doing all the technology. Better Weekdays is pretty cool if you want to check it out. It's a job matching service. So think of like eHarmony for jobs. So basically the difference between how you search for jobs now is you search for a job. Well, we think that kind of sucks. So wouldn't it be cool if you just like throw your stuff out there and then the jobs come to you? But wouldn't it be even more cool if the jobs were matched based on what you're looking for? Or wouldn't it be cool if it was matched based on your personality? So we actually have scientifically based assessments and some other stuff. I'm obviously pubbing my startup. But if you want to check it out, it's free. Sign up. Try it out. Give me feedback. Version 1, out there. It works. I know it's not responsive. I know it's not mobile friendly. Version 2, that is what I'm working on. That is what I spend all my days doing. So any suggestions or feedback, please let us know. All right. So Grunt. Why Grunt? Why this thing in general? And the first thing I want to kind of introduce for those who aren't familiar with the concept is this idea of making Drupal versus building Drupal, right? So when you make Drupal, we're thinking, okay, what do you need to do when you first start up a site? Right? You have to download Drupal, you have to download your modules, you have to set up your database, you have to make sure all your folders are there. If you're in a distributed team, you have to make sure the tests and the server and all this stuff is set up. If you're trying to look at code, you want to make sure you have maybe code sniffer set up, etc. Well, when you're building Drupal, you have to do all those things. But wouldn't it be cool if you could just make Drupal, basically say, this is what I define Drupal to be, you go off and make it, and then that way it'll save me some time. So one of the things that's been out there for a while is this concept of Drupal.make. Anyone not heard of Drupal.make? Okay, you guys are familiar with it. Cool. So Drupal.make, as you know, is a really cool process where you can just put a list of things in there, type a command, and it'll actually kind of at least start to bring the things together to build your Drupal site as needed. Another cool thing when it comes to using something like Grunt, and I'll get into what Grunt is in a second, is, okay, so now it's a thing that can help me make Drupal. What about actually simplifying the process, right? So one of the things, if you've ever used version control, anyone go to the intro to Git talk earlier? Awesome. So with version control, right, what are you typically doing when you start a project in Drupal and you do version control? You download Drupal and you just commit the whole thing into version control, right? Is that what everyone's doing? No? Well, if you are doing that, right, you're kind of putting two things in two places, right? You're getting contrib modules or other libraries. Maybe you've brought in some jQuery library, jQuery, but maybe some other JavaScript library or something else that's already in version control or part of some other package manager you're putting in your own system, right? So we want to simplify that and say, like, well, we don't really need that in our version control. We can just go out and get it. We want to make it. So using something like Grunt, right, will help you again, this make process, but then also the way that you can set up your Drupal project, which I'll show you in a second. You can keep all these other libraries that are already in version control, that are in their own ecosystems there, and then you just reference them. Okay? Transparency, right? So the other good thing about using something like Grunt is you want to quickly be able to see, okay, what's in this Drupal site? How many people have been brought onto an existing Drupal project before? Yeah. So the first year question is, okay, what did this person do? What did this team do? What did this client do, right? Have they gone down the panels track? Have they, you guys can pull out some of these chairs if you want. Just grab them. Did they go down panels track? Did they go down views? Are they committing global variables all over the place, right? We want to kind of bubble those issues up, and you want to be able to quickly take a snapshot of exactly what is happening inside the Drupal site. So in the way that you can use Grunt, you have this thing called declarative builds. Basically, the difference between declarative and imperative is that, okay, instead of saying, okay, this is how I want it to be done step by step, you can say, this is what I want it to do, and then you figure out how to actually do it. Okay? By having your process in this kind of build declarative way, it makes it actually really easy to reproduce, because now you could just tell someone, just download this thing and make it work. Right? Download this thing, run this command, it just works. That's why we love Drush so much. Right? You can say, run this command, and it will download the module for you in the right place. And you remember the days when you would say, like, hey, install this module, and if you're talking to someone who was just new to Drupal, you'd be like, okay, where should I put this module? Right? Should I put it in modules folder? No, don't put it in modules folder. Should I put it in sites default files? No, don't put it there, right? Having something like Drush just says, no, run this command, right? And then it'll do it for you. Grunt is kind of along that line. Run these set of steps, and then it will do this stuff for you. So being able to reproduce it, again, is an efficient learning tool. Another cool thing about using something like Grunt is that it can log the output for you. So if you decide to connect it to a process, maybe a continuous integration server that runs the command for you, the output that comes in the terminal, that can be logged, right? And that can be saved. So if you decide in your maybe team building or your system building process that those logs are important, I feel like logs are important, log everything, search later, etc., right? Having that output out gives you that transparency again of what happened, did it error, when did it pull in the thing that I needed, etc., versus kind of, I ran this command and I think it worked, or I think that was done, or I'm not really sure, when was it done, etc. Another cool thing that Grunt can help you do is improve quality. Okay? Test. How many people have never tested their code? No one's going to raise their hand for that. Right? So testing, right, has different kind of levels. You can have kind of the point and click testing. Maybe you have a QA engineer on your team. Those people are awesome. Those people save lives. I personally believe if an application works and an application has dealt with life-saving material, like the QA engineer is responsible for that, the last line of defense. Maybe you have something called behavioral testing. Anyone heard of BHAT? Awesome. So maybe you have behavioral testing where you have scripted things that connect, and then they go and make sure that when you click this button, this thing appears, right? But then you maybe we'll have something even more piecemeal, something like unit testing, right? Or functional testing, making sure that the individual functions or the individual pieces are doing what they're supposed to do, right? So being able to automate that or bring that in is obviously really important, and being able to set that up and run every single time you add a new change is also important. You can also enforce development standards. Why are development standards important? Well, because if you're bringing on new people or if you're trying to troubleshoot, right, you want to have some sort of standard that everyone can, again, efficiently figure out how something is supposed to happen. What is the spacing? How are the comments supposed to be formatted? Where should things be? Is everything terminated? Do things have doc blocks, have comments, etc.? At the end of the day, even though we all build things that work on robots, at the end of the day, a human has to interact with them. So the faster that a person can actually look at that and grok what's going on, that's really important. So setting those standards and being able to teach those standards, again, goes back to efficient learning. Other cool thing you can do with something like Grunt is you can track metrics, right? So you can see like, okay, when I first started the project, this is how it was going, this is how many tests we had, etc. But as it's gone on, right, this is where we are right now. Because Grunt is and I'll get to it in a second, because it's a process that you can continuously add to your development workflow, you can basically take those snapshots, get that data, and see how your team is doing, how the code is doing, what's the health of the thing that you're building. All right, so I just talked about why Grunt can help you make all these awesome things. What is Grunt? So Grunt is what's called a JavaScript task runner. It's based on a JavaScript. That's the website, gruntjs.com. Okay, and basically it does some really cool stuff. One, in a single word, what does Grunt do? It allows you to automate things. Okay, I know we've all probably seen episodes of Jetsons and walked into our house and the doors open, the lights come on, and you have those automatic kind of fantasies, right? Well, imagine being able to basically run a single command and the Drupal site is built for you or it's made for you. The code has run for you. It can tell you the errors. It can tell you how things have been going. It can print out a really cool emoticon if you want to. I know Jimmy did that with one of his Grunt stuff. You can automate all of that just by running a single command or hook into certain events depending upon the command that you push into it. The other cool thing that why Grunt is awesome is because it has a very simple requirement, Node.js. Most of you looking around probably have Macs. Node.js is built into Macs. So you probably can get away with just whatever's inside of your Mac at this point. Node.js obviously is built to run on any kind of Linux distribution. Anyone know if it works on Windows? Okay, awesome. So I'm sorry. Yeah, Node.js works on Windows too. So that simple kind of backend JavaScript library, the fact that Grunt only needs that, awesome. Very simple requirement, don't need too much, move on. Lots of plugins, has a really cool community. I believe at this point there's over 3,000 plugins, do a lot of different cool stuff. That is debatable of whether that's good or not, depending upon if you're in the Grunt camp or Gulp camp, but Grunt has a lot of different plugins as well. So if you want to do different things with Grunt, and I'll show you a couple of plugins that we're using at Better Weekdays that do a couple of cool things. That's all really cool, right? Drupal's awesome because it has modules and it has all these different kind of cool things, cool ways to do stuff. All right, so how do you actually install Grunt? And I apologize for those who can't see that in the back. Simple command. npm node package manager install it globally on your machine, which is the -g flag, and then install grunt-cli, Grunt, the command line interface, right? That's it. That's how you install Grunt on your machine or on your Vagrant box or on your server or what have you, okay? Now there's two other files that are important to Grunt, and I didn't put the folder structure, I actually put that up there. So there's two files that are really important, and there's a folder structure that's really important. Is anyone here, before I get into that, heard of Composer? If you haven't heard of Composer, please go and talk to Bo. He's sitting right there. Bo, raise your hand. Bo is the Composer Jedi Master person. So if you want to know about Composer, etc., especially if you're doing PHP, make sure you talk to Bo. You can talk to me too. So Composer, for those who haven't used it, is a package manager for PHP, right? You type in a command, you tell it what kind of package you want, it brings it into your system depending upon the configuration that you have. Grunt kind of works similar in the same ways. The file that lets you determine what packages you want is the package.json file. So if you look at something and you see a package.json, you know that it probably has some sort of Grunt tie-in to it, okay? When you run your Grunt command and you have a package.json file and it goes off and gets the various things that you're looking for, it will put it in a node_modules folder. So similar to when you have Composer, right, it puts it in the, anyone? Vendor folder, right? You don't want to keep that in your version control. Same for node_modules, okay? The two files that are also important in terms of configuration for your Grunt task is a gruntfile.js and a gruntconfig.json, okay? So the gruntfile.js is the thing that states, what am I doing? You put your tasks, etc. in there. There are other ways you can set that up to have tasks and auto-load them from different places, but for all intents and purposes, gruntfile.js is the master file that does all those things, right? The gruntconfig.json is similar to, for those who have been keeping track of Drupal 8, is similar to the configuration management type of idea, right? Where you have a YAML file or a JSON file that sets configuration values, okay? And then your gruntfile.js can reference those values. So for example, if you wanted to set a path to put things in and set it to a variable, you'd put that in gruntconfig.json, and then you would reference that variable in gruntfile.js. Make sense? And that's really important because if you want to have reproducibility and you want to share it, let's say your particular Drupal project has maybe the client's name in some of the folders, you'd probably want to put that in a gruntconfig.json because then you can just swap those out so that if you have specific tasks or functions or methods in your Grunt file, right? All you have to do is change the one value in your grunt config.json versus having to go through all the entire file and change it in various places, right? So it's kind of a typical programming practice. All right. Now, when it comes to Drupal and Grunt, how do we actually connect the two? So when I was at Phase 2, I'm a former Phase 2er, there's a really cool open source library that we have right here called Grunt Drupal Tasks. And basically what we did over the last year or so, or what they did and what I was part of, but I'm not there anymore, what we did is we went through the various processes of what goes inside of building or making a Drupal project, and then try to bring those together to make it easy to kind of set up Drupal projects. This is what we're doing for Better Weekdays. This is what I know Phase 2 is using. Has anyone else heard of this or seen this before? Okay, awesome. So if maybe you've tried it or what have you, and I'll kind of go through what that looks like and the different tasks that are inside of this. So this specific library that is open source you can use is how we're connecting the idea of Grunt, the task runner, the task, the automation, all these other things to Drupal itself. Please feel free to fork it, set up your own, but I think it's a good maybe primer, maybe something to start with and star if you want to at least kind of see like, okay, how do I actually see what this is doing? Okay, I want to change the assumptions here, I want to make my own, etc. So let's kind of jump in that for a little bit. So inside of Grunt Drupal Task, we already have the setup to deal with Make. We have the setup to deal with PHP-CS. Anyone not heard of PHP-CS? Okay, so PHP-CS stands for PHP Code Sniffer. So Code Sniffer, going back to those standards, is basically a standard of how your PHP should be configured. Or actually, I take that back. It's a system for checking standards, and you can plug in various standards as needed. So in the default Code Sniffer package, there's PSR2, PSR4, PSR0, etc. There's also a Drupal standard, right? So there's Drupal in terms of spacing and how functions should be named and how comments should be, etc. The Drupal standard is already part of our package here. So you can just run and I'll show you in a second, this is already kind of built in, so we'll already scan your code for best practices inside of Drupal. And then we talk about Behat as well, so if you want to connect with Behat, maybe you have Phantom.js or Phantom.js, or maybe you're using some other really cool library to do your behavioral testing, you can connect that, and that's all kind of built in as well. All right, so what does that actually look like? So that's really hard to see, and last time I tried this, I did a live demo, it didn't work, so what I did was that I did a demo, I captured it, I put it in a GIF, and then that way when you guys want to look at it, you can look at it as many times as you want. So what is actually happening if you want to set up a new Grunt project for Drupal is all you pretty much have to do, and I should let the GIF loop back around, is you basically run a single command. So assuming you already have Node on your computer, you would run npm, I'm going to wait this kind of go back around again. This is copying into place. Come on, it's showing that part. See, I practiced this and then I didn't practice the part of it having to go back through. So, okay. So what you would do is you would start with npm install grunt. So you already have Grunt installed, and you're telling Grunt to install Grunt Drupal tasks. And when you do that, it will go out, grab Grunt Drupal task, and install it for you. So what you're actually seeing right now is that it's going to that package on GitHub and then pulling all of the dependencies that exist for Grunt Drupal task, which is what that list is there. Okay, so you can see we have Grunt Composer, Grunt Contrib, all those various plugins I was talking about. Then what you would do is there's an example kind of starter package inside of this library. All you pretty much would have to do is just copy that example into your current directory. And when you do that, you'll get this kind of starter piece of how your project will start. So you'll have your Grunt config, your Grunt file, your composer.json, your package.json, etc. Okay? Okay. What you want to essentially do and how this is essentially set up, and again, I apologize for those who can't really see this, is you'll have a set of files. You'll have your Grunt config, your Grunt file, as we talked about, those are important files. You'll have your package.json. We'll get to PHP-MD in a second. That's another kind of standard mess detector for PHP. Excuse me. All of the magic is actually in the src directory. Okay? So when you do those commands that I just showed, this is what you'll have, and inside there, the magic is all, the part you want to concentrate on is in the src directory. So inside of src, we have modules, profiles, we have a make file, we have sites, default, static, and theme. So you can kind of see where this is going, right? And then we have a test file or test folder for Behat and some other testing. Okay? This is what you get by running those 2 commands straight off the bat, right? So already you've already got all these plugins ready to go for you to use, right? You've kind of got some scaffolding that I'll explain in a second with 2 commands, right? You don't have to download anything. Only thing you've done so far is you've installed Grunt, which I just showed you was a 1 command thing, right? And now in order to get ready for Drupal, you run a simple command to grab Grunt Drupal tasks, you pull out the example folder, and now you're almost ready to rock. All right, so now if you want to customize it for your project, right, we want to look in, like I said, source modules, source themes, source sites, source profiles, and then our project make. So what this is basically saying is that, okay, we're going to somehow connect these files and these things that you guys are all familiar with, right, modules, themes, profiles, etc., and somehow connect that to the Drupal universe. All right? How do we do that? So the first thing you want to do is that if you have custom modules, and this is a quick screenshot of what we have for Better Weekdays, for version 2 anyway, I have my custom module. So I put my custom module in the modules folder. There's no kind of going inside of sites all modules custom or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. You just put it in SRC modules. You put all your custom stuff in there. If you have a custom theme, you put it in SRC themes, right? If you have custom install profile, you can put it in SRC profiles. Okay? Then, after you've pulled your code into the custom area where your customizations are, right? Then we go back to, okay, we want to make sure that when we set up for our project, we go back to our configuration file, right? gruntconfig.json. In the default gruntconfig.json, the first line you'll see, okay, is it's pointing to the make file that's going to make your Drupal site. Okay, so if you change it, the make file, so the default make file name is called PROJECT.make. If you change the name to myawesomesite.make, you need to go into the gruntconfig.json file and change that value so that when it's referenced, right, in the various grunt tasks we already have set up, it knows which make file to point to, right? So if you go inside of make, for those who haven't, I don't think anyone raised their hand about make is, but in make, for quick refresher, right, you can set what your Drupal site should be. You can set the core version, you can set your contrib module, your release number, your patches, etc. For those who don't know, like, this is the preferred way, going back to that idea of transparency, right? Being able to look at a make file, a single make file, and know that this is what the site has at this exact point is extremely valuable, right? Because then you can see the version that it's on, you can see the patches that were committed, right? And then if you think about it from a version control perspective, it's even more powerful, because then if you want to look at the history of how things have changed, was that patch committed, etc., just have to look at the make file, right? If the patch is in there, then it was accepted. It was put in there. That's way different than having to drive down into, right, your folder structure and try to figure out, was this patch made or not, or find some esoteric patches folder where everyone puts all their patches, and maybe that one's applied, maybe it wasn't, or there's a whole bunch of patches in there, but we didn't really put this one in there because it didn't go with this version, et cetera, right? So having all that in the make file is really important, and we subscribe to that theory with using Grunt and Drupal. Other cool thing, and I know everyone is kind of sort of familiar with the libraries functionality of Drupal and bringing in external things. Make, as you probably know, can reference external libraries. So if you decide to use functionality, whether it's JavaScript or even extra PHP, right, outside PHP that's not inside the Drupal Git system, you can reference, right, Git URLs, Bitbucket URLs, any kind of version control URL in your make file. So now if you want to leverage CK editor or maybe some really cool packages from the, what is it called, PHP League? Has anyone heard PHP League? Sort of? No? I'm the only, okay, I know Bill has, I'm sorry. And you heard it, awesome. So if you want to use some really cool package from PHP League for date picking, or if you want to use like Guzzle maybe, in your Drupal 7 site for consuming REST APIs, that's going to be part of Drupal 8, just for those who want to practice that. You can just point that into your make file and it will bring that package in as needed. It's really cool. And that's really tiny. So here's an example of the make file that I have. And I'll get to that first line of why we're actually pointing to a Git version of core instead of just putting the core number in there in a second. But you can see here that you can put core patches, you can make your make file nice and pretty, you can add little comments of how you actually break it up. You can, again, add this sense of transparency, this efficient learning of how I organize where things are. Because organization is important, efficiency is important, and being able to track back how things are going is really important. All right, time to build. So now that you have your make file and you configured it correctly and you've pointed it correctly in grunt config.json, now it's time to actually build your Drupal site. So all you essentially run, and this is a GIF, so it's probably been running for a while. Come on. Awesome. So all you pretty much have to do to build your site is you run Grunt. When you run Grunt, what it does is that it runs through a variety of different tasks. So the first task you're seeing, even though the GIF is glitching a little bit, is that it's actually using Composer to grab, right, various packages that we want to use for our process. So something, again, like PHP CodeSniff or PHP MD mess detector. Okay, so and then it'll bring in Drush. And what's cool about it is it'll actually bring in those libraries and then makes them executable inside of a bin folder, which I'll show you in a second. Then as it finishes, it has other tasks that are already set up, like validating that your PHP is correct. It'll automatically do that linting for you. It will build some extra folders to build HTML, build cache, and then it actually goes through and parses the make file. So you can see here it's going out, grabbing various modules, grabbing various libraries, putting them in the proper place, and then it says it's running a clean function, which I'll get into in a second, doing some copy stuff, and then it says it's done without errors. Okay? So now if you actually look, once you run Grunt, so I've run command, what does it actually build? If I look inside the bin folder, it actually sets values for me that I can run as commands. So maybe Behat or Drush, I can just run bin Drush for you, and it's pointing back. It already creates a symlink back to the library to actually run that for you. Right? So if you want to run Drush or Behat or whatever inside of your Drupal site, all you have to do is run bin Behat. You don't have to install it, right, onto that machine, which is really good for Vagrant and distribution and replication, etc. You don't have to worry about this person have this version of Drush, this version of Drush, etc., etc. It's all kind of built in. Okay, that's a simple command. So what is actually happening here? So when you use Grunt Drupal tasks, right? We have, so going back to that idea of the grunt file.js, right? What we've done inside that package, and you can see this on GitHub, is that we've taken a variety of different processes that you typically would do, right, and put them in tasks. And then we reference those tasks in the grunt file.js. So if you look at the actual grunt file.js, it won't be that deep. It'll probably define a couple of tasks. But inside a tasks folder, we have individual processes written out. So we have like a quality.js, a clean.js, a build.js, things that would indicate what it's actually doing. So stuff like make directory, mkdir.js would do what? Make a directory for you. A clean.js would probably delete some stuff or clean out a directory for you, right? And all of those tasks and all that orchestration is already set up in Grunt Drupal tasks for you. So when you run the grunt command, you're basically saying, okay, find all of the Grunt plugins that have, first look in my directory and see if there's a grunt file.js, first of all. Because if it doesn't have a grunt file.js, it's just going to error out on you. Because you copied the example folder, right, from that first initial command, you'll have a default grunt file.js. Okay? Okay, so cool, you have that. Okay, now look at my grunt file.js, look at my grunt config.json, and then see what are all the tasks defined. Okay? So it'll notice, oh, okay, there's a dependency on Grunt Drupal task. What are all the tasks defined in Grunt Drupal task? Grunt Drupal task will have all these tasks specific to Drupal, right? It'll build your folder, it'll do the testing, etc., etc., etc. The really cool thing is if you want to see this in real time, outside of what's already showing here, you can just add a -v verbose flag to Grunt, and it will literally show you every single thing that it checks. Going back to my previous argument of why Grunt is awesome, if you connect this to a system like that has continuous integration, and you save all these logs, right? That is all saved. So if you decide at some point that, okay, I want to see what's happening in our build process, you can add a -v to Grunt. It'll print it all out, and then you can go and grep to your heart's content on your log files, right? So that, again, that transparency idea of seeing what is actually happening in front of you is really important to troubleshooting. All right, another cool thing, as I said before, outside of building, is that it validates and checks errors for you, right? So one of the hooks that it does, and one of the tasks that we've defined, if you specifically want to check your PHP files and your custom modules, you can pass a value into your grunt command to fire specific tasks. And the way that this works is in your gruntfile.js, your grunt files, if you, again, going back to JavaScript, when you define an object in JavaScript, you give it a name, then you define the object specifically. Inside of the object that Grunt uses to define its various tasks, each object label, each object name is a value that you can actually pass in to Grunt. There's a certain syntax you have to use to do it. If you have nested objects, you have to use a colon between each one. If you want to group objects and tasks together, you can actually define a task and then say, when this task is fired, run these other 4 or 5, right? So one of the tasks that we have registered is one called validate, which specifically runs the code sniffer and the mess detector and the PHP linting process on predefined files. So the predefined files would be your custom files, right, in source directory. So when you run grunt validate, what you can see here is that as soon as I run grunt validate, it says, oh, you have an error, a parse error on one of your files, right? So what can I do with that? Well, now, when it comes to checking to make sure that you don't have anything that's going to break your site as soon as you upload it, right, you can run this task or automate running this task so that if this task doesn't pass successfully, right, it doesn't continue the build. You can set that to a notification, et cetera, et cetera. That's a simple grunt validate task that's part of Grunt Drupal tasks. As I said before, let's say all of your code passes, but now you want to actually make sure it's of decent quality. You can use Code Sniffer. So when you run, and it'll refresh here. When you run grunt validate again, okay, it will actually, if you have formatting issues in your code, it will actually print out all of the various issues that it's finding according to the Drupal standard as associated with Code Sniffer. Okay, so when it comes to your commenting, when it comes to your spacing, when it comes to if you have a variable that's never been used and cleaning up unknown variables, that is automatically taken care of by just running the grunt validate task. Now the cool thing with this is that, okay, if I see this in the terminal, that's great, but how do I actually use it? There's just another thing we can use where we can actually print this out to an XML file. Okay, and I'll show you in a second what that looks like, but by printing it out to a file, you can have another process kind of hook into it, parse that file, then kind of give you a nice pretty graph and break it down and show you exactly how that works, right? And I'll show you that in a second. But this is built in as well. The code sniffing, the mess detecting, all that different stuff is run when you run grunt validate. So as I said before, automation has power, right? It makes your site portable, it makes your site shareable. When you think about bringing on new team members, when you think about maybe in the case, I know there's some people in this room who are probably their Drupal expert at their firm. When you think about trying to bring people on to learn Drupal or pull it into their portfolio, you want them to learn initially the best practices. By having a simple process to automate certain things, right, it reduces the entry barrier to allow them to kind of understand and fix the things or learn the things they need to learn. By having simple commands to set up a Drupal site, to not have to know all the different ins and outs, and again, it opens that door. Now, obviously, to be an expert, you want to kind of get in, right, the meat of something. You want to kind of know how the sausage is made. But in terms of working with other team members, especially new team members, having something simple at the beginning is really, really important and really, really valuable. The other thing that's really cool about it is, as I said before, is that if you want to build something that you know other people are having issues with, that is time consuming, now by using Grunt, that is, again, a kind of a really well known in the community in terms of doing automated tasks, you can now share your own plugins. You can share your own Grunt file. You can share an entire reproducible set of steps in one file, and someone would know how to do that because the process of setting up Grunt, running Grunt is all the same no matter what. Okay? Reviewing VCS history is easier. Again, I've managed teams, I've managed projects. The biggest issue, and I say this all the time, especially to my partners right now with our startup, is the greatest cost to building anything is not the new feature. It's always the troubleshooting. It always is the troubleshooting. Something didn't work the way you expected it to work, and we don't know where that is, or we got to figure out where in the chain it broke. most cost overruns is that unexpected time to spend troubleshooting something, right? The more you can put something in VCS, not just what you wrote, but the process of how something was executed, the logs of what was done, the changes, etc., it makes troubleshooting a lot easier, which means it doesn't take as much time to find the issue. Oh, this thing broke when I changed the module version number in the make file to this. Awesome. Because we're using a make file with Grunt, and Grunt enables us to build a Drupal site very easily, I'm now limiting the amount of time I can find, right, that particular issue, or at least go back to that particular issue. Because I'm using automation like Grunt to validate my code beforehand, I'm reducing the amount of time of seeing some really random PHP error that says t_string doesn't match whatever, right? You want to catch that early on. And as I said before, you can connect it to other processes, right? So by having this kind of automation task runner that's in a language that you probably pretty much already know or that you want to improve upon, right? By taking those various plugins, whether it's a custom plugin to one that's out there in the community, you can connect it to other things, and I'll show you why that is powerful. So I've talked a lot about continuous integration. Anyone not heard of Jenkins? Really, everyone's heard of Jenkins? Man, I remember when I asked that question, people were like, what are you talking about? I know a person named Jenkins. So when you talk about Jenkins, right, continuous integration, this idea that something is always happening as soon as you commit something, or when you talk about deploying to different environments or doing certain tasks, right? Jenkins, as you know, is this open source continuous integration server that has a whole bunch of different plugins as well. One of the easiest things to do in Jenkins is to write a shell script, right? Set up Jenkins, set up a job, bash shell script, be done with it, right? I want Jenkins to run cron. I'm just going to make a bash shell script to run cron, right? Well, because I just showed you that Grunt can be run from the command line, now your shell scripts are technically a little bit easier to execute because all you're essentially telling Jenkins to do is run Grunt. You don't have to create some really expansive, crazy bash script where if the person who wrote that script ends up leaving or, doesn't want to take care of it anymore, now they're like, okay, I don't really know bash scripting. I'm not sure what this is supposed to do. I can't really tell what's going on. But with Grunt, right, and the fact that all of the tasks are written in JavaScript, you can connect it to that. So by having Grunt installed on the server that Jenkins is, going back to that idea of that code sniffing and all the different errors in the XML file, Jenkins has a plugin called CheckStyle that can actually read those XML files and give you a nice little handy graph. Okay, so this is a graph of how our code has been going over the last few deploys. So you can see at the beginning it was high, and as you fix it, it goes down. There's a mess detection graph as well if you're using improper things in terms of PHP standards, etc. Right? Simple, fuss, no muss. And then if I want to bring on a new person who needs to manage this process, I teach them Grunt. Grunt has a whole bunch of documentation. Boom, it's there. The process is there, and I can do all the really cool things from that. Right? So that's one of the really cool things you can connect with Grunt. And the possibilities are really endless, right? In terms of being able to automate things, connect things, etc. So if you have different Jenkins jobs where, okay, this one should run the validate task, then this one should run the make, etc., or this one should run the mess detection, you can set the relationship up where, okay, I only want this one to run if this one runs successfully, i.e. don't build and make unless the validation passes, right? That's pretty easy to do because you're just running the processes through Grunt. Another cool thing that you can do with Grunt, and this is more of a philosophical way in terms of building Drupal, is that you can do static prototyping. So one of the cool things, what Grunt is used for a lot, is for compiling Sass, right? So when you're doing compilation of Sass or you're doing other really cool things on the front end, whether you're checking standards or maybe even using Bower to move JavaScript libraries around, etc., right? Part of that process, you can actually integrate other best practices when it comes to building out your site. So one of the things I'm extremely passionate about, and if you want to talk to me about it, I would love to talk to you about it, is static prototyping. I'm a back-end guy, but Photoshop is just, it just makes my skin crawl. I understand what Photoshop is used for, but when it comes to the web, I'm a big fan of static prototyping. I really, really, really strongly believe that at the end of the day, before you start anything, you need to have a prototype in static HTML, whatever it is, that a client or someone can look at, open on their phone, etc., and actually see what it's supposed to look like in the medium it's supposed to exist in.
You mean
okay?
It's not the PhotoNet?
What's that?
It's not the PhotoNet?
It's not the PhotoNet, you're right. Yes, it's not the photo net. It is not a picture of a website. It is the website itself. So one of the tools that I use is something called Pattern Lab. Anyone not heard of Pattern Lab? Okay, so I definitely encourage you to check it out. Pattern Lab, and I'm not going to do it justice, but Pattern Lab is a philosophy to static prototyping. It's not Bootstrap. It's not a framework of CSS that you use. It's a philosophy of how you build a website. It breaks your site into components, and it gives those components language, right? So the smallest component for a website is called an atom. Taking the science metaphor even further, components together would be called a molecule. And if molecules, if you bring it up even further, are organisms, right? And then if you have multiple organisms in terms of how their relationship to each other, you may have a template. But a template doesn't have styling. It doesn't have the actual details itself, right? The actual part where it lives is the page. So when you think about building a site in that manner and breaking it down in that manner, okay, it allows you to kind of communicate this idea, especially to clients, that it's not a picture of a thing, it is a makeup of many different components. So if the link color over here on this page is this color, that's going to be link color all the way through, because it's a reuse of the various atoms. Why is that awesome, and why is that important, and why is that cool in terms of Grunt? Well, when you build a Pattern Lab static prototype, so Pattern Lab, again, is this kind of library, this idea. It's a PHP-based static site generator that has all these ideas inside of it. You can build and watch and compile and do all this stuff, right, with Pattern Lab, which means if you connect it to Grunt, now you can have Grunt tasks. If you think about zooming up a little bit from your process where, okay, new client comes in, they want a new thing. Maybe you have some designers who do some color palettes, or they do, what is the term that Samantha Warren came up with? Style tiles, in terms of the ideas of the direction it's going. But in terms of actually building a static prototype, we actually want to have maybe a Pattern Lab based system. So now, anytime I do a commit or I change something, I want Pattern Lab to update, I want Pattern Lab to watch my Sass, I want it to build, etc., etc. Those can be Grunt tasks, right? Because you can run Sass, you can compile Sass, you can run those various things right inside of Grunt. And now, okay, so now the static prototype looks good. We show it to the client. They open up in their mobile phone. They click around. Granted, it's still a prototype, but they love it. Now when I bring it into Drupal, okay, and let's say in my Pattern Lab instance, I'm using various JavaScript libraries, or I have a certain set of CSS that I want. Now I can connect Grunt and Bower together. Anyone not heard of Bower? So Bower is a package manager for JavaScript. So Composer for PHP, Bower for JavaScript. I can have a Grunt task that takes that same CSS, those same JavaScript elements, and just throw them into a theme automatically when I build it, right? So you could have, there's a Grunt plugin called Wire Depth, which allows you to basically take those values that you set in your theme. So you know how when you specify a CSS file in your theme, you do style sheets, bracket, equal style.css, etc. There's a Grunt plugin called Wire Depth where you can basically set placeholders with a set of command on a file, okay? And then when you run the Grunt task, it will look for that placeholder and then put the text that you want right there. So now if you think about that, okay, so in the static prototype, the CSS is in the head tag, and it references this location. But when I want to bring it to a theme, it needs to be style sheets, blah, 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 style.css. If I use a Grunt task like Wire Depth to say, okay, when I'm building my static prototype, it should print out this way, but then when I build it into the Drupal theme, it should print out this way. You put a placeholder for one thing, you put a placeholder for another thing, you run Grunt, it puts it in both places. You don't have to copy CSS back and forth, you don't have to know like what the path is, it does all that for you, right? Single build process, okay? And that concept of static prototyping, single build process, et cetera, goes all the way back to what I was saying before about simplification, transparency, reproducibility, right? Teaching efficient learning. When you have that set up for your projects, when you just tell someone like, okay, set up a new project, run Grunt, be done with it, it's going to do this, that's powerful because it reduces, again, that hurdle of them coming onto our awesome little ecosystem of Drupal. And then deploying to Pantheon. Anyone use Pantheon? Yay, Pantheon. Okay, so I've done DevOps. I've played with lots of different things. For people who love it, God bless you. For people who don't, like, I love Pantheon. I also use Omega 8 as well, but I love Pantheon. Now, the one thing that's interesting about Pantheon, and I'm sure they'll fix it at some point, if they think it's a problem to fix, I guess I should say. One thing that's interesting about their platform is that they have their own kind of Git repository ecosystem, right? So when you want to push something to Pantheon, you have to basically copy, you have to either use their kind of default file structure, which is just Drupal default, right? And you have to kind of use their version control. So for me, I like Bitbucket, especially for private projects, and I like the structure of Drupal, Grunt Drupal tasks, right? I don't want the full Drupal head right there. So how do I actually get my stuff from the structure I just explained to you to Pantheon, committed, and do the whole kind of shebang I just explained? Well, if you go back to that make file I was showing you before, first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the core that you're using is the same as Pantheon is using. So Pantheon uses has an open repository called Drops. It's on GitHub, Drops-7. It's basically core with their tweaks in it. So again, going back to the make file, you can see that when I set up a Drupal core, I'm using the exact same one that they do. So if you've ever used Pantheon and you know, like when there's a new Drupal update, it doesn't happen right away, but when it does pop up, it shows like, hey, there's a Drupal update. That's basically that's pointing to their GitHub Drops-7 repository. Okay, that's why it doesn't happen right away, because they're testing it to make sure like it doesn't break anything for all the tweaks that they've done. So what I did was that I created a Grunt task to basically automate the thing I was doing anyway. So the way that I would do it was, okay, I would have my project in Grunt Drupal task form, source, modules, all that custom stuff. It would build it, it'd put the entire Drupal site inside of build/HTML, okay? Now, if I was bringing it into Pantheon, the only thing that changes, right, is sites all and profiles. That's the only thing that changes, because that's the only thing I'm messing with, right? So what I would do, if I was doing this manually, would be do what? I would copy, I'd probably delete everything out of sites all inside of Pantheon, copy everything from my custom repository, bring it over, right? Then I would probably do git status to see the difference, to see if there's any changes, right? So for those who've ever used version versus Git doesn't track files. It tracks differences. So deleting something and then bringing something in, even if you delete and copy it over again, if there's no difference, it won't show a difference there. It doesn't matter if the files are a different timestamp or whatever. All right? So I'll bring that over, and then once it's done, I'll look at it, add it, commit it, give it a message, and then move it out to Pantheon. But even before I did that, right, before I copied it over, I want to review it in Bitbucket, right? So I'd do a pull request, I'd comment on it, etc. All right, so since I'm doing that manually, I could probably do that in a Grunt task. And let's just use a really simple Grunt task, maybe like a Grunt plugin like Grunt Shell. So Grunt Shell plugin allows you to write shell commands as strings inside of JavaScript. So you give it a value and you say run this command, and if you run that command, it'll run this command on the shell. Okay? So now I have this really cool Pantheon object inside my Grunt file that basically says, okay, when it's ready to go, grab the stuff over here, put it over here, add it, clean it, etc., then push it to Pantheon. Okay? And that's actually what you see right here. So one of the things you can sort of see is that the messaging, when you look at the Pantheon log, is actually something being pushed from Jenkins. So the way that the further step that I did was every time I want to release to Pantheon, I tag it. Okay? So I have my local, I do my local, pull request, review, etc. If it's ready to go, merge it into master, tag it. Okay, now there's a tag. Now when I want to push it to Pantheon, we have a specific Jenkins process called Pantheon deploy, where when you click it, it asks you what tag do you want to deploy. Put in the tag, it checks out the repository from Grunt Drupal tasks, my custom project, does all the things I just described, takes all that stuff, brings it into the Pantheon repository, and then actually commits the message using that tag value. So now when I look in Pantheon, I can actually know what's on Pantheon because the message is the tag, and I can reference the tag in Bitbucket. So now it tells me where my project is in Pantheon. And I can automate that from Jenkins without having to do it manually each time. Right? So even when you connect it to something like your custom deployment process, you can do that with Grunt, and it's really, really cool. So how do we actually extend it? Right? So one of the things you want to do, and here's an example, is you maybe want to use you can either in your custom grunt file.js, you can just write your own tasks, or you can use what's called extend config plugin, which actually extends an existing task as needed. So in this case, I'm putting a couple of tasks inside the extend config object, and you can see here, as I said before, there's a plugin called Shell. So in this case, I have a couple of shell tasks. One is bower install. So if that one gets called, it'll run the shell command bower install. I'm sure there's a better, elegant way to do that. There's a pattern lab build. So when you build pattern lab, it's just, again, it's a PHP static site generator. You just run this PHP command, cd into pattern lab directory, grunt build, run that command, etc. Maybe there's a Pantheon clean. As I said before, you go into Pantheon, you delete some stuff, move some stuff around, etc., etc. But again, when you think about it from a team perspective, if someone were like, hey, how does this actually work? I'm like, hey, go look at the grunt file. It'll tell you exactly how it works. Here's the task, here's whatever. So now when they want to build it locally, they can see, oh, if I just run this command, it'll probably do this. If I want to test that the thing is working, I can run that command individually. It's really, really cool. If you want to know more about my diatribe of static prototyping, etc., and keeping Drupal simple, there is a blog post, and there's actually kind of a starter make out there. If you want to take a look at that. Oops. And yeah, that's it. Any questions?
Are these slides going to be up?
Yes. So these slides are up. Let me go to that. So before I get to that, so I'm told to remind you there's a sprint on Sunday. Please go to the UIC Tower, room 605. There's the MidCamp schedule, etc. Everyone is encouraged to participate. And yeah, there are the slides. That is a GitHub URL, so they're all there. Everything I just showed you is up there right now. That's actually what I'm using right now. Please give me feedback on my talk. I know I talk really fast. I was trying to get through a lot. So if you have feedback for me, please let me know. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle. The only thing I would mention is that my first name is spelled with one E and no K. So if you type in something different, that won't be me. Thank you. I think we have 7 minutes for questions. Anyone have questions? Yes?
Is there anything that would make you switch to gold? Like, because I know when you're starting out, like, I know people are like, if you've already voted in Grunt, it's, there's not really, but if you're just starting out, I've heard a lot of people say go with gold.
Sure.
It'll be faster,
so I'm starting to switch now. Like, I don't have any prejudice. I'll, try whatever. I mean, before Grunt, it was, what was that build to? Oh man,
it was awful.
Yeah, there's another like an XML based build system. What was it? Phing, that's what it was. So before Grunt, it was Phing. If the next thing is Gulp, that's fine. I think from what my research that I've done, and I'm going to be corrected if I'm wrong, is that Gulp has a lot more stuff built in like natively. You don't have as many kind of plugins. It does parallel a lot better. So if you have a lot of tasks that you need to run and you're trying to get it done quickly, and it's taking a long time to do certain things, Gulp does it a lot better. So yeah, I'm starting to experiment with it now, and maybe in a couple of months, this talk will be completely thrown out. I'll be like, hey, screw Grunt, I'm using Gulp now, do Gulp. Yes?
Why do you use Grunt for your install and not something like Yeoman?
Good question. So that's another thing I'm exploring. So one of the things that actually is an issue queue on Grunt Drupal task is bringing in Yeoman to do a lot of those other things as needed. So I just haven't had time to kind of contribute to that part, but it was something on the roadmap that we're looking at for sure. Yep, so many tools, so much technology. Why aren't you the hot new shit right now? It's like, I don't know, maybe I'll get there. Yeah. Any other questions? Sir?
How did you come upon Pattern Lab as your de facto static program?
Great question. So the question was, how did I come about Pattern Lab? So actually, I went to Event Apart, and that's when it was revealed. And when it was revealed, I was like, he kept saying, it's not Bootstrap, it's not Bootstrap, it's not Bootstrap. I'm like, okay, I think I get it. And I think when I left, and Jimmy maybe remembers this because I used to work at Orbit, I came back to Orbit one day and I was like, guys, I get it now. Like, we've been doing it all wrong. And I guess what really solidified it for me was part of new technology, outside of it being awesome and it does this thing, is people have to understand, like, okay, I sort of get what you're saying, but I don't necessarily know, like, how do I use it? And so the concept of static prototyping, I think it's still kind of like, when you say that, it's like, okay, I think I kind of know what you mean. It's kind of similar to what Bootstrap does for design, right? You say the word, and the fact that there's a follow-up, like people can Google that word, actually look at the documentation and be like, oh, okay, I kind of understand like colors and buttons and maybe I shouldn't use this in all these different classes. Like it's an efficient learning mechanism tool. So Pattern Lab to me was a unique set of words that brought together an idea that I'd been trying to communicate for a very long time. And the fact that it was in this very kind of nice, succinct package wasn't lost on me, right? You can teach, like, people sort of understand the concept of atoms, molecules, organisms. The fact that it was unstyled was like, well, why isn't this not in Bootstrap? It's like, no, it's this other thing. The fact that you would install it every project would have its own Pattern Lab. The fact that it was a client selling tool that you could say, hey, we created this thing called your Pattern Lab. We want your CFO and your swan divers to go in and open up their Pattern Lab and pull it up on it created this kind of connection with what we kept banging our heads against with our clients of understanding our process and what we were trying to achieve.
So you just dove right into Pattern Lab?
Dove right into Pattern Lab.
You didn't really vet any other static site generators?
So in terms of vetting static site generators, no, I didn't. Mainly because I didn't have the time to. I have played with Sculpin. If you're interested in another PHP-based static site generator, talk to Bo. He has this really cool thing called Sculpin. Before the Pattern Lab was just literally building static prototypes like from scratch. Opening Sublime, creating a homepage at HTML and just like building it straight from there. So the other part to it, so do you have suggestions of the ones I should try?
Prontotype. It's all twig-based and Composer.
What's it called?
Prontotype.
Prontotype. Okay, I have to check that out.
It's all production-ready code after
Twig-based.
Yeah.
Okay, so Drupal 8 there. Okay,
And
awesome.
the routes translate directly to CMI, so you don't have to see the routes.
Okay, so you said the routes translate directly to CMI, which is awesome. For those who don't know, CMI is configuration management. So being able to set your route right there in configuration management is really awesome. Okay, Prontotype. I will check that out. Thank you very much.
It's free.
And it's free.
And it's open.
And it's open. Any other questions? Thank you for that. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.